Good morning. I'm going to teach you about glazing today. So I just purchased some new glazes and I'm going to create a test on this demo piece I did on the wheel while you all were learning cylinders. So the first thing about glazing is you will get your bisqueware. You will need to prepare the pot. So what that means is you will feel it. If it has any like sharp, jagged edges, you will get some sandpaper and a paper towel, not a canvas, but a paper towel, and you will need a wet sponge. So you will take and sand off any of the like jagged edges. This part is optional. You do not have to do this if you don't want to or if there's not a lot of sharp edges. Once you sand, you will have some dust. That dust is harmful. Do not blow it around the room. You will need a damp sponge and you will wipe your piece off. If you do not want to sand, you still have to do this step where you wipe the piece off. So it's not like soaking wet, it's just like a damp sponge. There's no water squeezing out of it, but you will wipe the pot off to get any dust off. So it won't affect when the glaze starts to run and won't cause any issues. So once you have everything prepared, because I'm using just a paint on glaze, I don't plan on dipping. I'm not going to actually wax the bottom of my pot. Instead, I just won't paint that area. You could wax, but it's just wasting material because we're not actually dipping. So I'm gonna just not paint the base where the piece is gonna touch the kiln shelf. So with glazes, as we know, you have to stir them up. We should never be picking up the glaze by the top of the lid. In case someone in the class didn't put the lid on correctly, then it will spill everywhere and we have lost not only supplies, but money, time of cleaning up, and all of that. So what we're gonna do is go ahead and open up our glaze. So when you open the glaze, you should grab a spoon. The spoons are over on the counter right over there, and you're gonna just stir this up. Just like if we were dipping in the back using a bucket, we use a big whisk to whisk up all of the glaze that has settled at the bottom, and we want that to be mixed up really well. So I'm just gonna take and mix that up. Okay, after you mix that up, try to get all the glaze scooped off the spoon back into the container. Like I said, we want to save as much of all of the materials that we can because we have a limited budget. So I have cleaned that up pretty well. I'll set my spoon aside. I always have just a damp sponge by so I can wipe my fingers on if needed. When you are glazing, you should use a very fluffy, big brush. You should not be using a tiny little brush and painting back and forth. This requires 3 coats. Don't get confused with it saying cone 5, 6. That is the temperature that we fire at. So it is not 5 or 6 coats. The directions for actually applying coats are on the back where it says instructions, but most of these are 3 coats. So you apply a coat, let it dry, apply a coat, let it dry, apply a coat, let it dry. So 3 times, 3. All right, so I have everything ready. You do not glaze on our canvas that we build our clay on. You can use a paper towel or you can glaze right on the table. You could also glaze on a banding wheel if you wish. Some people like this. You can put your piece on the banding wheel and then spin as you are glazing. So I will show you this method. So I like to glaze the inside of my piece first and then the outside of my piece. So I'm gonna go ahead and dip my glaze brush into the glaze and notice how much glaze I have on there. It's not just a little dip, you are loading up your brush. You're going to then start painting from the bottom to the top. So you'll want to try to do this. If you don't like the banding wheel, I'll show you first how to do it with the inside. And you're just going to paint from the bottom and swirl that right up the top. Like I said, you really want to load your brush up and glaze and put that on in a thick manner. So you can see how that's looking so far. You do have to keep track of the number of coats that you add. So far, I have only done not even one. Don't worry if the hairs of the brush come off into your piece. It will burn off in the kiln. It is not a problem. Okay, so that is what the inside of my piece is looking like. I need to let that dry fully before I add the next coat, or else it'll just simply pull off what I already put on. So I'm gonna let that dry, and then once it's dry, I'll add my second coat. Once that's dry, I'll add my third coat, and that will be done for the inside. Then the outside is what I will paint or glaze next. When you go to clean up, you will do the same thing here. One thing I wanna make sure you are doing is actually cleaning the edge of the glaze containers. If you don't do that, all the glaze will get crusty, it's hard to open, and then it just sort of makes a mess. So make sure as you are cleaning up, you clean the edge of your glaze container. You put the glaze back on tight, and then you put it back on the shelf where you got it from so others can use. By the way, if more than one person wants to use this at a time, you can actually get a tray and then scoop, mix it up with your spoon like I showed you, scoop some into the tray, and then take your tray and use this and paint it. You should also write down what you use. So in this case, I'm using lavender mist, and it is the Speedball Mid-Fire. So I would make a note of that in my sketchbook or in my slide deck, whatever is easiest for you to manage. Now that I've talked a little bit, most of this is dry. You can still see there are some wet areas, so I'm gonna let that dry a little longer before applying a second coat. Glazing does take time, and you do have to have patience, or else the color will not come out as you intend it to. Happy glazing, and ask if you have questions.